Now I threw in the Amud Eish and the Amud Anon. I just couldn't skip it. Again, I didn't find a Sicha on it. I didn't find a Maimer on it, and I didn't want to skip it. So I gave you Rabbeinu Bechaya without the text. You can look it up yourself. Rabbeinu Bechaya is translated into English. You probably can find a copy of it downstairs. Here's a new topic, and again, it's a topic which I couldn't find in a Sicha. And it drove me crazy because the Rebbe talked about it so much. So I took a page of a Maimer, and that is the mystical side of the Exodus story, the pneumistic side of the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, and that is the V'acharechen Yetzu B'rechush Gadol. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they took along great wealth, right? V'acharechen Yetzu, and then they will go out with great wealth. It's such a weird detail, isn't it? Jews are slaves. God says to their ancestor, their patriarch Avraham Avinu, that you're going to be enslaved in Egypt with all the glorious tragedy of that slavery. I mean, it's terrible. Goes with time was terrible. And then don't worry, they're going to leave and they're going to come out rich. No, the Gemara actually says, rich schmitch, let's get out of here. Who needs money? They were slaves. No, you got to take a lot of wealth. It's a funny little detail. And it doesn't happen once. How many times is Rechush Gadol referenced? Over and over again. In the beginning of the story, in the middle of the story, at the end of the story, Moshe, remember to borrow, remember you got to leave rich. And by the way, there's a Gemara, and I forgot which Masech it is, but there's a Gemara that tells the story that in the time of Alexander the Great, Alexander Mugdin passed through Eretz Yisrael. It was only a few years. Alexander's whole reign is 12 years. He passes through Israel, and the Egyptians call the Jewish people to a dintayra, they sue them, they take them to court, to Alexander the Great. What's the issue? It says in your Bible that when you left Egypt, you took our wealth, you want our money back. You said you were buying a bunch of Jews. You took our wealth and you left Mitzrayim. So the Gemara, there's 3 different stories in one sequence, and one of them was about Egypt. The Egyptians come along and they say, you owe us millions and millions of dollars, and our source, our evidence is your Bible. So the Jewish people were at a loss, and there was a man who was a cripple, and his name I can't remember at the moment, who said to the Chachamim, let me handle this. And he came before Alexander the Great, and he said to him, you're right, we owe him a lot of money. But there's another obligation. We were their slaves for 100 and some years. So let them pay us for our years of slavery. We'll pay them what we borrowed, and we'll separate the difference. So the Egyptians ran away. End of the story. And the Gemara says it happened to be a Shemitah year where there's no food, and they left their fields and didn't know what to eat. It's a Gemara. So yeah, on a technical level, Yidden's taking wealth was a pathetic form of compensation. Right? As I'm talking, I'm thinking of the American Indian, it's such a tragic story. There's no nice way to tell the story. Do you know the story of the American Indians? Do you know that before Columbus, there were tens of millions of people on this continent? Tens of millions. And by the way, we killed most of them by mistake. We killed a lot of them on purpose. There's a famous Spanish explorer who was called Conquistador, which means conqueror. He came to America, he lived in Central America, he's from Spain, and he just killed so many Mexicans. But most of them we killed by mistake. Does anybody know how? How did we kill the American Indians by mistake?
Bringing diseases.
Disease. The Europeans had diseases with a lot of immunity. The American Indians had no immunity because they'd never been exposed to smallpox and to malaria. And millions and millions of Indians died. And, the Christians said, this is the Christian God being vengeful of the pagans. And the Indians said that our gods are angry. Everybody had a whole explanation. It was very simple. It was disease. The Europeans were resistant to these diseases because they'd experienced them for so long, and they recovered from them, and the Indians died in their millions. Anyway, but the bottom line is, we came here, Europe came here, and just made believe there was nobody here. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's the story of history. I mean, it's happened again and again and again. It's not like it's unique, but the world today is, so to speak, sensitive. So So we wanted to sort of, we can't pay the American Indians back. Just no, we can't, it's impossible. You can't compensate. What are you going to do? The only way to do it is to vacate the continent, go back to Europe and say, here's your lands back. First of all, we're not going to do it. And second of all, between me, you, and the Indian, they don't want us to do it either. What would they do with it? So it's a tragedy. And I don't know if you understand what happens to American Indians. There's two philosophies. Some of them assimilate. They become Americans, or they become Mexicans, or Guatemalans, or Peruvians, or Ecuadorians, and so on, and they become part of another world. And some of them insist on remaining their distinctness, and they live in these communes, live in these places, and it's a very complicated and sad story, because we're not helping them, they're not helping themselves. It's a complicated, sad story. That's the long and short of it. There's a right and a wrong here, which I don't want to get into because I don't want to talk about the American Indian. But the point is, you didn't leave Egypt, take along a lot of wealth. They take away in other words, the wealth was on a certain level compensation. It wasn't adequate. You can't pay back for a nation being enslaved for over 100 years, but they took wealth. But the Torah obsesses over this wealth. The Torah obsesses over this wealth. The Torah makes this wealth into something so significant that it repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself. So of course, Chassidus talks about it like he talks about everything else. And one of the ideas which is so important when Chassidus talks about the wealth that the Jewish people extracted from Egypt is what we call the elevation of sparks. It wasn't only material wealth. When Hashem created this world, He placed sparks of holiness, or if you will, forces, energies all over the world. And they were given away to Tumah. And one of the many things that has to happen in terms of the world achieving its destiny before Mashiach comes is to retrieve all of these sparks, retrieve all these energies and make them holy. Egypt was incredibly rich with sparks of holiness, more than any other land in the world. And these sparks of holiness may have expressed themselves in powers of the occult, in all kinds of forms of black magic and great intelligence. They were very smart. The Egyptians had knowledge. I mean, Adayei Mazeh, there were things that the ancient Egyptians did. We have no idea how they did it. None. We really don't understand how they built the pyramids. We don't. We have all kinds of theories about ramps and things of the sort. The Egyptians practiced dentistry. The Egyptians used to fill teeth. How'd they do it? That's a fact. We find, the Egyptians preserved their bodies. They had ancient practices of medicine, which we don't understand. It's very simple. They had knowledge, very smart. What they didn't have was paper, right? I mean, the big crime of the ancient world is that there was no record. They didn't write anything down. And personally, I think part of the reason they didn't write things down is because they had better memories. Why do you write things down? Because you're going to forget. If you're not forget, there's no reason to write it down. They didn't have paper. There's no record, right? And then, of course, in the modern world, if there's no record, it didn't happen. But in any case, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they didn't take their material wealth per se. They took the spiritual wealth out of Egypt. And that's the meaning, that's the spirit behind the Rechush Gadol, the great wealth. So there's actually a mystical allusion to this in the Chazal. There's an expression in the Gemara, which is explained in Hasidus, in light of what I just told you, that the wealth that the Jewish people extracted from Egypt was not only physical wealth, it was not only material wealth, it was spiritual wealth. What is that allusion? And now I'm lecturing, I'm not reading a text. I have one piece of paper which I'm hoping to get to, but so far I've been talking. The expression is that when they left Egypt, Rashi brings it, As'uha kimitsuda she'ein ba dagon ukimitsula she'ein ba dogim. They made it like a trap that no longer has any has no more feed in it, or has no more bait. And they made it like the depths of the sea where there are no fish. As'uha, they made Egypt kimitsuda, so that means a trap. She'ein ba dagon, there's no more bait. There's nothing left to draw the birds to come into the trap. Ukimitsula, mitsula and mitsuda are very similar. Mitsula means the deep. In the deep there are no fish. She'ein ba dogim, dogon, dogim, very similar. So it becomes a poetic phrase. Mitzudah, she'ein ba dagon, mitzulah, she'ein ba dagim. They made Egypt into a land that was a trap without any bait, and a deep which has no fish. So technically, what the Medrash is describing, what the Gemara is describing, is that they just took everything away. They left Egypt, took everything with them. Their wealth. But spiritually and mystically, it's explained as follows. For those of you who are familiar, there's a lot of Kabbalah that separates the idea of the land from the idea of the sea. You familiar with this? The land is called the revealed world, the sea is called the hidden world. The meaning of this is, on the land, if you live on the land, you are outside of your source. According to Genesis, according to Bereshis, land animals were created from earth. Sea animals were created from water. And birds were created from a combination. That's how Chazal, how the Rishonim explain birds having reptilian feet. Right? Evolutionists explains bird having reptilian feet as being the evolution from the dinosaurs. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, but paleontologists, biologists tell you dinosaurs are still around. They're called birds. There's an assumption that birds evolved from dinosaurs, and one of the basic proofs, besides the fact they lay eggs, is their feet. They have reptilian feet. The Chazal say birds have reptilian feet because birds are a little bit of an animal of the land and a little animal of the sea. They were created from the earth and the water combined. Okay, our lesson on paleontology is now officially over. Land animals are created from earth. Sea animals are created from water. What's the difference? Land animals are created from the earth and they have to be outside of their source. Sea animals are created of water and you cannot separate from the source because they'll die. You follow? So there become two realities. A reality of living things that live because they're separate from the source, and a reality of living things who live because they're intimately one with their source. So the land and the sea represent two ideas. And accordingly, there are different kinds of sparks. When you speak about divine sparks that are hidden in the world, there are divine sparks hidden in the world that are comparable to land, which means they're from their source, and there are divine sparks which are comparable to the sea, which means in some way they're connected to their source. So when the Chazal say that when the Jews left Egypt, they left Egypt as a trap with no bait, and as the deep with no fish, what they're saying is, we took every single spark out of Egypt, both the sparks of what's called the revealed world, as well as the sparks of what's called the mystical world, the secret world. In other words, this parable, this gestalt that the Chazal use, and the double expression, a trap without seed and the deep without fish, is representative of two types of sparks that we elevated when we left Mitzrayim. You understand? So we took along wealth. Spiritually, the wealth we took along are the sparks of godliness, sparks of holiness, which Hashem had planted in Egypt, and of course we incorporated into Kedusha. And according to Kabbalah, this is brought in Payim chapter 37, when we complete the elevation of the sparks, Mashiach comes. And there's a whole fancy situation about how you understand what the sparks are and how you get the sparks. Bottom line is, you and I don't know what's going on. We're waiting for Mashiach desperately. We hope it's to come today. And he's keeping us waiting. You understand? Keeping us waiting. Is he ever keeping us waiting? So now, on this basis, there's Chassidus. Look at your Maimed. Let's read. Okay, I have 15 minutes. Let me see if I can pull this off. There's not a lot underlined, right? But this is an allusion to two psukim in Parashat Bishalach. In the few lines that I underlined, this is a Maimed from 1961, Tafshin Chaf Aleph. You'll notice the date. It's right after Yud Shvat. It's Yud Aleph Shvat. So the Rebbe, I gave out more copies here. The Rebbe said this Maimed, it was very connected to the season of Yud Shvat, I think. It is. The Maimed is a hemshech to the Maimed of Yud Shvat, from Tafshin Chaf Aleph. But I chose this Maimed. I was poshut looking for a source. When I got up this morning, I knew I have to teach Sichos, which, by the way, always means it's less preparation than Siddur. Siddur is, I never finish. But I also knew that I didn't have any source material. I knew what I wanted to teach. I didn't know where I was going to get it from. So the Amud Ha'esh, the Amud Ha'anan, I pulled out of my pocket. I didn't even look at the Rabbeinu B'chai. I'm speaking from memory. But this, I wanted to find a source where it speaks about this idea, that when Yidden left Egypt, they didn't just go away. They took Egypt along, and not just material wealth, but spiritual wealth, the ruchniistic wealth. So it's in the words of the Maimon and Teirah. So we're going to read and translate, okay? I just want to emphasize that today's class is built around two psukim. The first pasuk is the very, very first word in the Maimon. Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am. You see it? And it was when the Pharaoh sent the people. The second pasuk is the very last underline on the bottom of the first page. Peites uparoi hikriv. You see those words? On the left side of your page, near the bottom, the first words of the last underline, upara hikriv. You see? Yeah. So I'm giving you a class on two psukim. Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am is the first pasuk in Parshas Bishalach. That means it's Exodus 13:17. And the words upara hikriv are 14:10. Okay, the difference between the two contexts is this. The first pasuk describes the Jewish people leaving Egypt with the Pharaoh's blessing. He's kicking them out of the country. Go! Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am, the Pharaoh sent the nation away. You with me? Upara hikriv is after he has this change of heart. Remember that story? Right? They didn't leave, and then Pharaoh said, wait a minute, they took our money. What should the Egyptians have said? Let them take our money and go. Let's get as far away from them as we can. No, we got to get our wealth back. And they chase after them. This pursuit of the Jewish people is described as a upara hikriv. The Pharaoh leads from the front. Most kings would stand in the back of an army. The Pharaoh's at the front, at the head of his army. He's leading them into battle. And the Pharaoh approaches the Jewish camp. You understand? Upara hikriv. And the Pharaoh comes close. These two biblical passages are interpreted in Chassidus and in Chazal as allusions to these sparks that the Jewish people are taking from Egypt. You understand? So I'm building the next few minutes and this notion of the Yidden taking sparks out of Mitzrayim around these two psukim. Let's start from the first one. Look at the beginning of the Maimon. Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am v'goymer. Which word is extra? Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am. Which word is extra? I'll give you a hint. Which word is always extra?
S.
Vayehi is a pretty good answer, but the correct answer is S. Mm-hmm. If you take all the S's out of the entire Torah, the pshat won't change. But Eishes bara lakim hashamayim v'ha'aretz rather than Eis hashamayim v'eis. Who needs the Eis? And here also, Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am. You know how the word S is translated as along with. Vayehi Bishalach parei, the Pharaoh sent Es ha'am along with the people. Every S, the Gemara says this, means a secondary component. Whenever you have a word that comes along with an S, the word means one thing, and the S means what comes along with that first thing. It's a rule in Chazal. And there's a Gemara that discusses this. Every single S in the Torah has an interpretation. So Chassidus says, Vayehi Bishalach parei es ha'am means, and the Pharaoh sent along with the people. You understand? Not he sent us out of Egypt. He sent something with us. So what is the S referring to? The sparks of godliness that we took with us. The Pharaoh sent us out of Mitzrayim, es ha'am, and along with the people were the sparks of holiness took from Mitzrayim. You follow? That's how you read this. Let's read the Maimon inside. Vayehi Bishalach parei es ha'am, when the Pharaoh sent the people out of Egypt, and again, the read that's more precise is, along with the nation, mevur b'teira eretz as a Chasidus. That the Pharaoh sent along with the Jewish people, that means beautiful things and branches, fruit and tree. He sent along gifts. The Jews left Egypt, and the Pharaoh sent along with all kinds of delicacies. Vahainu, this means, shal yedei galusam b'mitzrayim, through their exile in Egypt, v'hishtabdusam bohem, and being enslaved in Egypt, sign better than they went in, but more. Whenever somebody calls, this interrupts the video. There's got to be a way for me to let it happen. Someone just called and my Facebook disappeared. Okay, sorry. Bechinas nitzutzim shenaflu b'Mitzrayim, the concept of the sparks left in Egypt. So if this pasuk would say, Vayehi Bishalach parei ha'am, we wouldn't know this. The word S tells us there was something else besides the people that left. So it says in Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in Teirah, that the Pharaoh sent along with Egypt sparks. Now here's a weird idea. The Jewish people leave. They take all the sparks from Egypt with them, right? And Pare notices that they left a couple behind. So he runs after them. Of course, you learn the Chumash, he's running after them to kill them, take them back, right? But in Kabbalah it says he's running after them to give him the last couple of sparks. That's how it's explained in mysticism. The Pharaoh knows Yidden came to Mitzrayim to redeem Egypt and take the sparks of godliness in Mitzrayim. They left a couple behind. He's chasing them to give them those last sparks. Look at the next page Peites. The question is, why do we credit the Pharaoh with giving us these sparks? We understand the idea. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they took along sparks. But why attribute it to the Pharaoh? Why do you have to say that the Pharaoh gave them these sparks? Say, we took them on our own. Do you understand the question? The Pharaoh sent along these decorative forms. It should say instead, Vayehi, Kishayatsu Yisrael mi Mitzrayim es. Somehow find a form which would denote that they didn't leave themselves, they took along the sparks. Why are we giving Parai credit for the sparks? He was the enemy. Ubehektim, to be sure. I want you to know that the Mechilta makes a similar reference. We're learning a pasuk and explaining the Yinapi Chasidis. The truth is the Mechilta, which is a classic medrash, a very important medrash, says a very similar thing. Quote, Vayehi Bishalach. The pasuk says the Pharaoh sent us out of Egypt. But the terminology that uses Bishalach says the Mechilta, Ein Shiluach B'chol Mokam Ela Livui. When someone visits you and they leave, and you describe their departure as if you sent them away, it means to say that you accompany them. You remember last week's parasha? Right? Vayishlach Meishes Chaysnei Vayelech Lo Yalatze. Jethro, remember Jethro? He comes to visit the Jewish people in the desert and then he goes home. How does the Torah describe he goes home? Moshe sent his father-in-law and he went back to his land. What does it mean? Vayishlach, he sent him. So the Mechilta says, any time a departure, when someone says goodbye and leaves, is described as being sent away, it means that they were accompanied. That the host, Yisra didn't leave, Moshe walked with him a distance. That's what the word leave means, to accompany, like a lavaya. So the Mechilta suggests that when the Jewish people left Egypt, the Pharaoh accompanied them. There's another medrash, besides the Mechilta. This is a medrash Rabbi, that when the Jewish people left Egypt, the medrash asked, the Pharaoh sent them out. They left on their own. Now read the underline. Ella, the answer is, the Pharaoh accompanied them. Says the Rabbi, these two medrashim, which presumably, supposedly, allegedly, apparently, or as they like to say in Brooklyn, and I hate this word, seemingly. I don't think it's such a word. I really don't. I think it's a Crown Heights concoction.
Like me also.
Me also. That's one word. Me also.
Me also.
It's Yiddish in English. That's all. When the Medrash describes the Jewish people leaving Egypt, and you have two sources, a Mechilta and a Medrash Rabbi, that the Pharaoh accompanied them, says the Rabbi, this Medrash is saying what Chassidus is saying. The Pharaohs accompanied the Jewish people didn't mean he walked them out of the country. He didn't accompany them part of the way. It means they took a piece of him with them. The sparks of holiness in Egypt they took along. So the Rebbe says there's actually midrashic sources, there's so to speak nigla sources for this Kabbalistic idea that Yidden going into Mitzrayim and coming out of Mitzrayim, which of course was very, very important for what we call the birth of a nation. The Jewish people were born by going into Mitzrayim and coming outside. The melting pot of Egypt created us. We became a nation by going into Mitzrayim and being slaves there, and then being redeemed from that place and freed from that place, and being given freedom and made free people and given the Torah and so on and so forth. But we also took along the sparks of Egypt. So this Kabbalistic idea has a source in the Medrash. But why are we giving Pare credit? We should give ourselves credit. You understand the question? Bottom of the page. So the answer is the second pasuk. Ufada Yikriv. The Jews leave Egypt, and the beginning of the parasha describes the departure of the Jewish people from Egypt as Bishalach Parei es ha'am, they take along, they don't only leave themselves, they take along sparks of holiness from Mitzrayim. And then you move forward to Sheni. The Jewish people leave, the Egyptians start to say, wait a minute, they took all our money, I want my stuff back. And if they had any seichel, they would say, let them keep our stuff and stay as far away from Mitzrayim as possible. But they categorically lost their minds. Categorically lost their minds. Says we got to go get it back. And they chase it. And the biblical terminology used to describe this event is called Parei Hikriv, which means the Pharaoh approached. Now, you know Hebrew? Huh? Stat. If you want to describe a person approaching another person, what word would you use? Uparei Korav. What does Hikriv mean? He brought others close. If the Pharaoh is approaching himself, we'll say Parei Korav. Hikriv means he made others come close. Now, of course, there's many different reads on this anomaly. The translation of the word the Parei Hikriv is the Pharaoh came close. That's what it means. And of course, in allusion, it means that he was leading his army from the front rather from the rear. That's what it means. But in Hebrew, Hikriv doesn't mean he came close. Korav means he came close. Hikriv means he brought others close. And there's many interpretations of others. One of them is sparks. Another is, this is like even weirder, look at the next words. V'amru Razal, it says in Medrash, again in Medrash Rabbah, Shehikriv eslibam shal Yisrael lavim shebashamayim. When it says Uparei Hikriv, it doesn't mean the Pharaoh came close. It means he brought others close. And in addition to the more basic idea that bringing others close means, as I told you earlier, Parei, I think it's a teddy from the Mezritcher Maggid, but I couldn't find it, chases after the Jews because they left a few sparks behind. He says, take these two. The way it played itself out, it was a war. But what was happening mystically was Parei knew, spiritually, his Malach knew, whoever's up there, that the Yidden came to Mitzrayim not just to become a nation, but to take the wealth of Egypt with them. They left a couple of dollars behind, so he ran after him, here, take the couple of dollars. Right? But here he says something else. That he brought the Jewish people to Tshuva. Hikriv es libam shal Yisrael la'avim shebashmayim. In pursuit of the Jewish people, the Pharaoh is making people Sheparei pol b'Yisrael lo inyan da'avedas hatshuva. The Jews leave Egypt, and in his pursuit of the Jewish people, he brings the Jewish people to a tshuva state, that's stronger than the tzaddik state. So now we're adding another aspect. That not only is the reference to Parei in Parashat Bishalach describing how Parei gave us sparks, but it's also describing how he brought more sparks out of us. He brought us to a new level. Turn the page. Okay? Okay, so the Rebbe explains it. What does this mean? It's just a couple more lines. Whenever you have a condition of a pharaoh, and in slavery, and in incarceration, and a narrowness in Egypt, it's the difficulties that bring us to the madrega of tshuva. So these two psukim play off each other. Vayehi Bishalach Parei and Parei Hikriv both mean two things. Number one, they mean that he chased after the Jewish people to give them sparks. And number two, he chased after the Jewish people to get the Jewish people to find the sparks within themselves. She'en Yonahu, the notion of tshuva is hapach hasheichel and heido mridal miskin, transforming darkness into light and bitterness into sweetness. And then the Rebbe says the words that are relevant to us. Shezeo gam teichen o inyan, the bitter on the tutas. This is the substance of elevating sparks, or separating sparks. The Rebbe says, understand that bringing Yidden to tshuva and bringing sparks to the Yidden are really the same thing. Bringing Yidden to tshuva means helping Yidden find the sparks within themselves. So why do we attribute the spark that the Jewish people took out of Egypt to the Pharaoh? Why do we say Parei gave us sparks? And the answer is because in terms of the sparks, technically, we don't have to attribute them to the Pharaoh, we contribute them to God. God gave us wealth. But in terms of how those sparks were found in us, the sparks were found in us. We discovered an inner strength because of the Pharaoh. And that's why we attribute the elevation of the sparks to Parei, because there's two parts, if you will, there's two parts to each spark. Pardon me. One part of the sparks is the wealth of Egypt, which represents the wisdom of Egypt, the spiritual powers of Egypt, which have to be incorporated into Kedusha. And the other part of Egypt is the sparks that are within us, to bring us to a higher level, the level of tshuva. And really they're the same. And since when it comes to bringing us to tshuva, it's dafka the tzaras, dafka the pharaoh, which brings us to tshuva, so we say a similar notion that the whole idea of Yidden elevating sparks comes from these challenges. So what did I just teach you? What did we just learn? We just learned a maimer. I didn't really read the maimer. I'm just reading the words of the maimer that are serving my purposes. It's based on Teira Eid. It's a maimer from the Rebbe, which is why I'm teaching it, if I am using it, which basically says, number one, when Yidden left Mitzrayim, they took along wealth. This wealth represented the sparks of Egypt. The sparks had two dimensions. The sparks in the world and the sparks in the Jewish people. And we reached them, we elevated them, dafka, because we had adversity, an enemy, a pari. Okay, so today we actually learned two whole topics. Remember what we did last hour? They have no connection. They're not even cousins. Amud ha'esh and Amud ha'anan and Nitutas are very, very far apart. So we literally had two classes today instead of one long class with a coffee break.